Why do 70% of drivers feel uneasy on empty highways at night? Is it the isolation, the darkness, or something more sinister lurking in the shadows? The feeling of unease is almost palpable, a creeping sensation that something is not quite right. It was past midnight, the witching hour when the veil between worlds is said to be thinnest. Daniel, a long-haul truck driver, was no stranger to these late-night drives. He pulled onto an empty stretch of Highway 13, a route he had driven 100 times before. But tonight, the road felt different, almost as if it were alive and watching him. The usual familiarity was replaced with an unsettling sense of foreboding. The trees lining the road seemed darker, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out. The air inside his cab was unusually cold, sending shivers down his spine. After miles of silence, his CB radio crackled to life, breaking the eerie quiet. A voice barely above a whisper came through the static. "You shouldn't be out here." Daniel grabbed the radio, his heart pounding. "Who is this?" Silence. Then he noticed something in his side mirror, a shadowy figure sitting in his passenger seat, a figure that hadn't been there moments before. He slammed on the brakes, heart racing, adrenaline surging through his veins. Turning his head slowly, he found the seat empty, as if the figure had never existed. But when he looked in the mirror again, it was still there, more vivid than before. A woman, pale-faced, with hollow eyes and an eerie, frozen smile. Her smile sent chills down his spine, a smile that seemed to hold a dark secret. Panicked, Daniel floored the gas, hoping to outrun whatever was haunting him. But the figure didn't vanish. Instead, it moved closer, its presence becoming more oppressive. He could feel icy breath on his neck, hear a faint whisper. "Take me home." Daniel gripped the wheel, shaking. "Who are you?" he stammered. The voice turned into a low, raspy growl. "You don't remember?" Suddenly, Daniel's memory flashed. Years ago, on this very road, he had fallen asleep at the wheel. He had hit something, or someone. The woman smiled wider, her eyes filled with a haunting recognition. The last thing Daniel saw was her hand reaching toward his face before his truck swerved off the road. When authorities found the wreckage, they discovered a chilling detail. The passenger seatbelt was buckled, but Daniel had been driving alone. Daniel's truck lay in ruins, a twisted heap of metal and shattered glass on the dark highway. The night was eerily silent, save for the occasional distant howl of the wind. But his story was far from over. The accident was just the beginning of a much darker journey. As he lay unconscious, he was transported to a hospital. The paramedics worked tirelessly, their faces grim under the harsh lights of the emergency room. When he woke up, he found himself in a room with no windows, and the only door was locked from the outside. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with an unsettling sense of confinement. He could hear faint whispers and footsteps echoing in the hallway. The shadows seemed to dance on the walls, creating an atmosphere of dread. The eerie feeling from the highway seemed to have followed him, wrapping around him like a cold, invisible shroud. He tried to remember what had happened, but his mind was a blur. Flashes of the accident, the screeching tires, and the woman's face haunted his thoughts. The only thing he could recall was the woman's face and her chilling smile. It was a smile that seemed to promise both secrets and sorrow. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's condition worsened. The beeping of the health monitor became a constant reminder of his deteriorating state. He started seeing the woman everywhere, in his dreams, in the reflections of the hospital windows, and even in the faces of the nurses. Her presence was inescapable. He knew he had to find out who she was and why she was haunting him. The need for answers became an obsession, driving him to the brink of madness. One night, he decided to escape. The hospital room felt like a prison, and he knew he had to break free to uncover the truth. He waited until the hallway was silent and then made his move. Every creak of the floorboards sent a jolt of fear through him. He managed to unlock the door and sneak out. The corridor stretched out before him, dark and foreboding. As he navigated the dark corridors, he could feel her presence growing stronger. It was as if she was guiding him, leading him to some unknown destination. He finally reached the exit, but just as he was about to step outside, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. The touch was icy, sending shivers down his spine. He turned around to see the woman standing there, her eyes filled with sorrow. Her presence was both haunting and heartbreaking. "You can't escape your past," she whispered. Her voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 regrets. Daniel knew he had to confront his past to break free from this nightmare. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, overwhelming and undeniable. He decided to return to the highway where it all began. The road that had once been a scene of tragedy now held the key to his redemption. He needed to find out what had happened that night and make amends. The drive was long and filled with a sense of impending revelation. As he drove down the same stretch of road, memories started flooding back. The screech of tires, the blinding headlights, and the moment of impact played out in his mind. He remembered the accident, the impact, and the woman's lifeless body. The guilt and sorrow he had buried deep within resurfaced with a vengeance. He had buried the memory deep within, but now it was all coming back. The weight of his past mistakes pressed heavily on his shoulders. He stopped at the exact spot where the accident had occurred and got out of the truck. The cold night air bit into his skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of his guilt. The air was cold and the night was eerily silent. The stillness was almost suffocating, amplifying the tension in the air. He could feel her presence again. It was as if she was waiting for him, expecting him to make amends. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the darkness. His voice cracked with emotion, the weight of his apology hanging in the air. Suddenly the woman's figure appeared before him. Her presence was ethereal, almost otherworldly. She looked different this time, less menacing and more sorrowful. Her eyes, once filled with anger, now reflected a deep sadness. "I forgive you," she said softly. Her words were like a balm to his tormented soul. Daniel felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The haunting was over. The chains of his past had finally been broken. He had faced his past and made peace with it. The sense of closure was overwhelming, bringing a calm he hadn't felt in years. As he drove away, he felt a sense of relief and closure. The road ahead seemed clearer, free from the shadows that had once plagued him. The highway no longer felt haunted, and the woman's presence was gone. The night seemed more peaceful, the stars shining brighter. Daniel knew he would never forget her, but he also knew he could move on with his life. The future held promise, and he was ready to embrace it. The nightmare was finally over. The past had been confronted, and now a new chapter awaited him.